My name is Chris. Thank you for that introduction. This presentation is another chance for me to thank the people that nominated me for this award. It's easy in science, or I found at times to feel a bit lost, a bit uncertain. And so I really am grateful to all of my nominators, Patrick Mercier-Langevin and Jean-Luc Pilat, to sort of remind me that I'm on the right track and to keep going. And it's also a great chance to remind all of us that we're part of a geoscience community, and the Mineral Deposit Division's role in sort of fostering that sense that we're all together. And so if you're feeling a bit lost or uncertain, there's a group of people around you who sort of know exactly what you're going through. And so it's great to be part of this community. I thought I'd start with 3 slides, just giving the context of my research for the last few years. Um, the first context is critical minerals. So you know something's a bit different when you start hearing presidents and prime ministers talk about minerals. You know something a bit is going on. And it's easy to, when you hear the news stories about critical minerals, to forget that this is about geology at all. A lot of the talk about critical minerals is on processing and supply chains and the circular economy. But us as economic geologists, what we recognize is that yes, recycling is important, but there are new sources of critical minerals that are going to be needed to meet the energy transition. And so our science is important in that context. That's how we fit in. And then as a geological survey, we have to understand how we fit into this picture as well. And I think it's best said is, geological surveys help find the haystacks, and the mineral industry helps find the needles in those haystacks. And it's a simplification, but I think it's an important, first consideration to figure out, how can I contribute to this big idea of critical minerals? And I think that's what this presentation is really from that perspective is what can geological surveys do to help this problem? That's not the only government priority going on right now. So the government has already committed to conserving 30% of Canada's landmass by 2030. As of last year, we conserved 14%. And so essentially what that means is that when we look at this map of Canada showing the protected areas currently, they need to essentially double in size, and they need to double in size in the next 7 years or so. So it's an enormous challenge. And so on the one hand, the government wants to find more critical minerals, new sources of critical minerals. On the other hand, the government's already committed to these conservation targets. And so then how do we balance both of these priorities? Because they're both putting pressure on the land. And so from a geological survey perspective, I think we can contribute to this discussion by bringing our geoscience to the table and sort of identifying areas in Canada that are important for critical minerals to contribute to that land planning use exercise. The third piece of context that's important for critical minerals is a sort of this explosion in sort of geoscience diplomacy. There's a incredible recognition that the supply chains of critical minerals are global. And so Canada can't solve these problems on its own. It's part of a bigger picture. And from a scientific perspective, this is fantastic news because we've always, geologists don't think from political boundaries perspective. We think about systems, earth systems, mineral systems, and we've long recognized that those mineral systems cross those political boundaries. And so what that allows us to do is sort of understand mineral systems at spatial scales that were previously pretty impossible to do because we were thinking sort of maybe more regionally or on a district scale. But when the emphasis turns to sort of international collaboration, we can start looking at mineral systems from a completely different perspective. And if you're interested in sort of the research results from these international collaborations, please check out this website here, criticalminerals.org. One of the first things that we did when we started working with the United States Geological Survey and Geoscience Australia was we sort of tried to take an inventory of what are the geological sources of different critical minerals. And so if you're new to this space, the critical mineral space, and you're a geologist thinking like, how do I fit in? I'd encourage you to go check out this publication by the United States Geological Survey by Al Hofstra. So this document sort of describes all of the different known geological sources of critical minerals into a single classification system. One of the things that we tried to do as part of that work is identify the most prospective geological environments for critical minerals. And so this picture is trying to highlight how the different sources of critical minerals relate into a tectonic framework. And so this provides our first sort of clue that the critical minerals just don't occur everywhere. They're actually associated with different tectonic environments, and those tectonic environments can be mapped. I'm a geochronologist, and so not only do we understand critical minerals from the space perspective, so from a tectonics perspective, we also want to understand it from a time perspective. And so that's to integrate time into our understanding. That's really where the benefit of thematic research. So one of the things that's been really important over the last 25 years as part of the Targeted Geoscience Initiative is not only to release data to the public to help find new sources of critical minerals, but develop these conceptual models of how those mineral systems form in both time and space. And one of the real keys to this research then is then to apply this knowledge to generate prospectivity models. And that process of going from a conceptual model to a mineral prospectivity model is this mappable criteria. So that's where we take data and we try to imagine how that data actually maps a different component of a mineral system. And my favorite part of this is that some creativity is required. So to give you an example of how this works and how creativity is required, um, we can use our knowledge of mineral systems in time and space with some recent advances in plate tectonic models to sort of identify the sources of mineral systems back through time. So this is really on the back of a lot of the work being done as part of the G Plates research group. Their plate tectonic models are getting better and better, and they're going back further and further in time. And not only are they doing all of that research, they're also making their access to their plate tectonic models easier. So EarthBytes released an application programming interface. So that allows us to sort of query plate tectonic IDs and return their paleo latitudes at different time intervals. And so that's what I've done here on this map. Basically, this map is made up of a bunch of pixels. And basically, I've sort of queried, what is the age of this particular pixel? What is the plate ID of that pixel? And because we have this application programming ID, I can call to that technology and return the paleo latitude of every pixel for North America based on its age and plate tectonic ID. And so the areas in orange here are sort of these low paleo latitudes, and the areas in blue here are sort of other latitudes. And then the areas in gray are areas that we have no idea what the paleo latitude is because the age of those rocks goes beyond the plate tectonic model. And what this does is it allows us to identify areas in the geological past that were sort of could have potential for these pre-enriched brine source regions. So we know that for Mississippi Valley type deposits, we know that the zinc and the lead are carried by these sort of really salty waters. And we know that those salty waters are sort of more favorable where it's hot and arid at low paleo latitudes. And so we can test that hypothesis with this graph on the bottom. So this is paleo latitude at the x-axis, and the two different types of lines here are the pixels containing MVT deposits in solid and the pixels that do not contain MVT deposits in the dashed line. And we can see is that the distribution of pixels containing MVT deposits is really concentrated in this from the 0 to minus 30 degree paleo latitude, whereas barren pixels tend to occur at higher paleo latitudes. And these two lines can actually be converted are actually a solution to Bayes conditional probability theory. So the probability of a deposit given its paleo latitude is the dark blue line in solid, whereas the probability of just that paleo latitude are sort of just the distribution of paleo latitudes for all pixels. So the bigger the difference between these lines, the more important that variable is in predicting mineral potential. And so what this example shows is sort of how can we get creative? How can we start taking the data that already exists and apply it to map different features of mineral systems? So here we're sort of taking data that already exists. We already know the rock types, we know their ages, and we know their tectonic models exist. And so it's just combining those data sources for the purpose of prospectivity modeling. Another example is sort of mapping deep pathways. So when we're thinking about mineral systems at the continent scale, we need to sort of get creative with our geophysics. Satellite gravity has been around for a long time, but it's almost never used in prospectivity modeling at smaller spatial scales because oftentimes there's higher quality data. So if you're mapping at the mineral district, you probably have a survey over that particular district. But when we're trying to map the globe or we're trying to map entire continents, we don't often have high resolution surveys everywhere. And so we can actually use these satellite gravity data to sort of identify the deep pathways of mineral systems. So this map shows satellite gravity data processed to show mass surpluses in red and mass deficits in blue. And what we can find is that a lot of our magmatic mineral systems occur at the edges of those mass surpluses. So these kind of like pink colors that are bordering these the red colors. And so this wasn't really done before. This data was collected for a completely different purpose. Satellite gravity data was not designed to map out mineral systems, But that's the beauty of when you start thinking creatively, working with colleagues, coming up with ideas. We can sort of retool, we can reuse these sorts of data sets to great effect for mapping mineral systems. Of course, geology data is complicated. We don't just need to sort of create these new mappable criteria. We need to think creatively about how we sort of integrate our data. And so I've kind of become kind of obsessed with these discrete global grid systems. And so what these discrete global grid systems basically cover the entire planet. And then what they allow you to do is take data of all sorts of different formats, different coordinate systems, different resolutions, and give it an address. And once you have that address, you can then join all of these data together. And so what we're essentially doing is taking data from all sorts of different sources, different resolutions, spatially indexing it, so giving it an address, and then combining that data to create a data cube, which is essentially a big CSV file. And then once and that CSV file or that big data cube is sort of what we use to generate prospectivity models. And then we want to revisualize that data. We can then convert that data cube back to sort of a map to sort of show where those prospectivity models occur in space. So these discrete global grid systems are very powerful because they come in different resolutions. And they're also they're kind of an area of research. And so one of the things that's happening is that they're creating discrete global grid systems for time. And so this is exactly how like Uber gives you sort of the best ride, the closest ride. They're based on this kind of system. And Google Maps is also using their own version of a discrete global grid system to give you directions. One of the things that people often talk about when we show prospectivity models is sort of, this is great, Chris, but we have lots of missing data. How certain are you? Modeling uncertainty is a huge part of the prospectivity modeling process. And one of the things that we've sort of been advocating for is to address the issue of uncertainty is to create families of prospectivity models. Modeling is not just a one-way process. It occurs in a loop where you want to do this over and over and over again, using different data sets, using different assumptions, using different methods to sort of generate families of prospectivity models. And so this just gives you a sense of what we're trying to do here. So the smaller map of Canada up here on the right is showing a prospectivity model just based on geophysics for magmatic nickel deposits. So this data is almost 100% complete. So there is no missing data for this smaller map. And then we can compare that, and sorry, that the data that's 100% complete, we call that our baseline prospectivity model. This is the data where we can kind of remove the uncertainty of missing data from the modeling process. And then the bigger map is showing our preferred model prospectivity model. And so this model is preferred because we're using all of the available data sets, so even data that's missing in some cases. And so by comparing and contrasting these models, we can sort of test different hypotheses, like how important is that missing data? Where is that missing data most important? And so this is the type of sort of modeling workflow that's really important for our prospectivity modeling, is to sort of understand the limitations of the approach. And we also want to compare models quantitatively. So this figure on the left is showing what's called a success rate curve. So the x-axis on this diagram is the percentage area of the model in model space from 0 to 100%. And then the y-axis is showing the amount of magmatic nickel deposits predicted by our model from 0 to 100%. And the goal of prospectivity modeling is to predict as many deposits as possible in the smallest area as possible. And we can compare our model results for our training data set and our test data set. So the test data set is the part of the model that has never been trained on. So it's essentially our best way of guessing, like how well would this model work in an unknown area. And the closer that this area under the curve, the AUC, is to 1, the more realistic or the more accurate we think that our model is. And so here we're comparing that baseline model. That's our model where we're essentially using just complete geophysics only data sets, so no missing data, compared to our preferred model where we're using geology and sort of data sets that do have missing values. And we can see that we can improve our model performance as we sort of use these data with we use information that's partly missing. So our AUC for the test set is 0.934 for the baseline, and our AUC for the preferred model is 0.955. And so this is how it works. It's sort of modeling is an iterative process, and we will sort of want to go back and check these metrics to make sure that we're doing it the right way. What are the barriers to prospectivity modeling? Well, data quality and availabilities are still major issues. We do need new surveys to address those knowledge gaps, but they're expensive and take a long time. So our aeromagnetic and gravity data have been collected over decades. The data gaps that we still have are not going to be solved overnight. And so we sort of need to think creatively about how we can do the best job we can with the data we've got now. Um, the absence of positive and negative labels is a major issue. So we use positive labels. These are known mineral deposits and occurrences, but there just aren't very many of them. And we really don't know negative labels at all. And so in the future, we're trying to sort of integrate drill hole data so that we can better predict the presence of mineralization using sort of more and more positive and negative labels. But I think the biggest barrier, honestly, to prospectivity model is the gap between what we know about mineral systems and our ability to apply that knowledge. And so for the next few slides, that's really the gap that I'm most interested in. You know, we've been studying mineral systems for a long, long time, and we know a lot about them, but to apply that knowledge is sort of a separate problem. So that's where sort of deep learning comes in. Deep learning is a form of artificial intelligence that differs from other machine learning techniques in that the features are extracted as part of the training process. So in other machine learning, oftentimes the modeler has a bigger input. You select the data. Oftentimes you engineer features that you think are important. So that was kind of like our paleo latitude. We sort of used our brains and we thought about like what's the best way to map sources. We developed this new mappable criteria, and then we input that into the machine learning method. Well, deep learning takes that step out of the process. So instead of us creating the features, deep learning creates those features. And so we can use this as part of supervised learning, so to generate prospectivity models. But we can also use deep learning as a form of unsupervised pre-processing. So for unsupervised pre-processing, that means we just take our data as is. We don't have any labels at all. We input that data into our neural network with one or more hidden layers, and then we have an output. And the neural network learns how to generate that output from the input while compressing the data in this hidden layer. And so the way that these models work is basically the better that you are able to recreate your data after going through the hidden layer, that's how you sort of can generate the most important features. The features that sort of best represent that input data after going through the neural network are the new features that are the most important. And we can also, so we can make these autoencoders better by adding more and more of these hidden layers between the input and output, or we can actually stack autoencoders. So instead of having multiple hidden layers, we can have one hidden layer, but we can then put the input data through one autoencoder, take that output, put into the next autoencoder, and so on. To show you just an example of how this process can work, here is the results from one stacked autoencoder containing data from 30 geophysical data sets. And the output is this new feature. So this is a new map generated by the neural network and showing sort of what appears to show from the geophysics data set is the presence of superficial cover in the Hudson Bay lowlands as well as the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. So the advantage of deep learning is that it's creating new features that we can use for prospectivity modeling without any human intervention. So this really can add some value to our prospectivity modeling workflow. But I think the other way that deep learning can sort of add new mappable layers is by using natural language processing. So state-of-the-art language models are based on deep learning, and they're trained on huge volumes of general internet text data. And so you use these language models every day when you're using Google search or trying to sort of predict text on your phone. If you're trying to fill it in a sentence and it suggests the next part of your sentence, that's an example of a language model. And they work in kind of an interesting way. So I sort of wanted to figure out like how can we show you how these sort of language models work. And so what I did was I took all the text data from geological map databases in Canada from 22 different map sources. And all I did was I took that text data and I counted up the co-occurrence of words. So which words occur in the same map descriptions. And then I plotted on this network. And the network shows that the most co-occurring words occur closer together. And then as you move away, those words don't co-occur as often. And what happens when you plot the co-occurrence of words are these concepts emerge. So siltstone, sandstone, conglomerate, these all plot close together because those words tend to occur in the same rock descriptions. And then next door, you have sort of gravel, sand, and unconsolidated. So that different cluster of words, those tend to occur together, but they don't tend to occur in the same way as siltstone, sandstone, conglomerate. And so we don't, as geologists, when we're describing rocks, we don't mean to do this, but we're embedding our knowledge in our rock descriptions. And we can then extract that knowledge using just a simple co-occurrence of words. And so these different clusters of words on this network represent geological concepts that we can then use for the purposes of prospectivity modeling. So the process here is we take a sentence like red conglomerate with granite clasts. We take that sentence and we process the text to turn it into word tokens. So we remove some of the useless words like, let's see here, these are called stop words. So with would be the useless stop word here. And then once we have our word tokens, we attach the word embedding. So these embeddings are just learned using either neural networks or the co-occurrence of words from the training data. So in this case, our training data is geoscience documents, peer-reviewed manuscripts. And then once our words are attached to a numerical vector or a word embedding, we can then plot those words in vector space. And so words that have a similar meaning plot close together, just like that network analysis was showing. And it's hard to understate how just important this concept is, because now what this allows to do is to search through our data, not just using matching words, but by matching concepts. So you could come to me and describe something that's really important to you, and we could return results with none of the words that you used, but with similar concepts. And so this is how sort of modern search engines work. It's called semantic search. And I've become really interested in this because I think semantic search has a lot of parallels with prospectivity modeling. For me, prospectivity modeling is just a really fancy search. And we can also plot these word vectors in space. Here we have our public geological databases using the unstructured rock descriptions. So this is just like sentences, just rock descriptions as input. And we've processed that text data. We've taken those word tokens, attached them to a word embedding, and then we can't just plot 300-dimensional numerical vectors on a map. So we have to sort of compress that data. And so here I've compressed that data into 3 dimensions. And what shows is that all of that text data, when we compress it, it shows actual geology, which is actually pretty remarkable for me, I think. So here in the greens, we can see the outline of the Canadian Shield. The purples are these sedimentary basins, and then the orange are sort of the unconsolidated superficial cover rocks. And so this model, this map didn't know what the Precambrian, doesn't know what the Canadian Shield was. It doesn't know what sedimentary rocks are. But based on the co-occurrence of words, these sort of concepts emerge. And so I think this is a really powerful way for us to create geological maps in the future using AI. These word vectors can also be used to do specific tasks, like if we want to predict the probability that a map polygon has a pegmatite, for instance, we can do that, which pegmatites are important for critical minerals. Or we can use these word vectors as direct input for prospectivity modeling. These word vectors are also really important for measuring uncertainty. So in the past, when you were mapping, it was always really hard to create, how uncertain you were of that rock description. And so here, what I've done is I've taken each word in a rock description, and I've calculated what's called the cosine similarity. So that's how close those word vectors plot in vector space. And I've calculated the standard deviation of those for each rock description. And so the yellows in this map show map descriptions that have really different concepts. So these are map polygons that may have like very different rock types in them, whereas the blues represent rock types that all have similar semantics, similar meanings. And so in addition to sort of creating geological maps using natural language processing and AI, we can now actually measure our uncertainty. So we can go back in these areas, maybe want to revisit some of these rock descriptions that have lots of different concepts to sort of refine our geological map. I think this is the future of prospectivity modeling because it allows us to more closely take our mineral deposit knowledge and apply it. So if someone came to my office and said, Chris, this is how I think orogenic gold deposits form, I would take that text, process it, convert it to word tokens, and then calculate how similar the map polygons are to that description. So here's a description showing what the most important traps for orogenic gold deposits, and then the map is showing where those rock polygon descriptions most closely match that mineral system model. And the map shows sort of areas that are not prospective for gold. So for instance, the Hudson Bay lowlands, the reason for that is because there's argillites and black shales there. So they are a good trap, but they're in the wrong time. So maybe we then want to go back and refine this description with sort of the time element and then create the new semantic subsummary map. And so in this way, and this is instant, this is not, this doesn't take hours, this takes a second. And so what we're trying to build essentially is a way to talk to our maps. We're trying to build a way to Google search our maps and extract more information from them. And we want this to be more accessible as well. So, uh, you know, it's okay to do this, at the Geological Survey, but we want this to be available for everyone. And so one of the things that I've been working on for the last year is to sort of create an update to the Wheeler All map. So Wheeler was our last national geological map. It was created almost 30 years ago. But the provinces and territories have made tremendous progress over the last 30 years mapping their geology. And so this bigger figure is here. Both of these maps are color coded the same way, just showing that the resolution of our provincial data sets are, 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, sometimes 20 times higher than the Wheeler map, which is mapped at 1 to 5 million scale. So we've standardized data across Canada, and the contract is almost complete. So we hope to release this new geological map of Canada next year. And it's going to be a powerful data set for future AI-based research because all of the text data from those source maps has been retained. So we're really trying to sort of make it easier for people to do this sort of natural language processing research in the future. So I think the first part of the conclusions are sort of that first of all, the role of geological surveys and critical minerals is to find those haystacks. And finding haystacks really means prospectivity modeling at the continent scale. I think there's this urgent need to sort of be better at sort of taking what we know about mineral systems and applying that knowledge. And I think natural language processing and deep learning are critical to that. And I think by focusing on the national scale research, that also allows geological surveys to sort of work more closely with our international collaborators and other disciplines. So that's sort of the first priority, the critical minerals. So the second priority is sort of these conservation planning. Like how can we take these prospectivity models that we're generating and sort of work towards more sustainable geoscience? It turns out that conservation scientists are trying to do the exact same thing as the prospectivity modelers. We need to expand these protected areas, but we need to expand protected areas in the places that matter most. And so one of the things that conservationists do is that they look at the ecological representation of their protected areas. So the black lines on this map, like the thin black lines, represent different ecoregions. And the goal here for conservationists is that each ecoregion would have a certain degree of protection to maintain biodiversity. So here I've done a protected area gap analysis showing, where there is good protection. So which ecoregions have enough protected areas to conserve biodiversity, whereas which ecoregions have poor protection. So these would be less than our 30% target. And we can see that most ecoregions in Canada have less than the conservation targets require. So we need to expand protected areas in a lot of places. And what's most concerning is that some ecoregions have no protection at all. So these are areas in gray. And so just like mineral potential modelers are trying to find the best places where to find new critical minerals, conservationists are trying to find the best places to add these protected areas. And so this is a way for geological surveys to work with other research scientists, so ecologists, climate scientists, biologists. And so this project was working with all of those types of groups to identify sort of the most important data sets that can go into conservation planning, whether it's carbon storage. These are areas where there's lots of forest biomass or maybe lots of organic soil, carbon-rich soil. Or maybe it's really important freshwater ecosystem services. So these are watersheds that have high precipitation and rivers that connect those areas of high water capacity to sort of agriculture or cities. Or maybe we want to map species at risk directly. So where are the places in Canada where species at risk live? And we also want to be conserving for the future. So climate refugia are places in Canada that are sort of the slow lanes of climate change. So these are areas in Canada that may have lots of forest canopy or deep canyons that are cooler. And so these are places where biodiversity will be important for the future. And our goal then is to sort of combine all these different conservation data sets with the gaps in the protected area network to identify areas in Canada that are very environmentally and ecologically sensitive. We then can combine that information with our prospectivity modeling to generate maps like this. So these are sort of, it's called a bivariate choropleth. So the areas in pink are the areas that are high potential for magmatic nickel deposits. The areas in blue have low potential for magnetic nickel deposits and also high ecosystem services. And then the areas in purple are places that have really poorly protected ecoregions, high species at risk, and high nickel mineral potential. So these are the areas that we predict are going to be sort of areas where there's multiple land use priorities. So these are areas that we sort of need to conserve, or they're environmentally sensitive.
Sorry, I think I lost my sound there. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay.
now I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So it's basically what this map is trying to show is how do we balance our prospectivity with our conservation priorities? And we need to sort of, and how to inform land use planning. And so we can kind of zoom in on these areas that are sort of high potential magnetic nickel deposits, as well as high ecosystem services to help land use planners predict where those conflicts are going to occur and to sort of prioritize areas for conservation. And I don't think it's just governments that are where this sort of data is going to be important. A lot of companies are sort of now reporting that sort of being nature positive is part of their corporate strategy. And so as companies sort of become, and for them, nature positive means exploring and conserving at the same time. So companies are also going to have to start thinking about or how they're going to conserve areas and how they're going to explore and how they're going to balance all of these priorities. So I think this is an issue that's going to be really important in the future for government, but also for communities and also for the mineral exploration industry. And it's not just maps. So we can also use this type of information to predict what the most important repercussions or the potential conflict zones for searching for critical minerals are. So this plot here is showing our different species at risk and the percentage overlap between their known ranges and the areas of high magmatic nickel deposits prospectivity. And so we can see here that some of our species at risk have over 75% of their range are located in areas that have high potential for magmatic nickel deposits. And so as people sort of increase mineral exploration for magmatic nickel deposits, there's a good likelihood, or we're predicting that these species at risk would be the ones most affected. So this is just another example of how we can use pre-competitive geoscience data to address this issue of sustainability. So that's the conclusions for the second part is sort of we want more critical minerals, but we also are looking to expand protected areas, and both of those priorities put pressure on the land. And so the question then becomes like, how can public geoscience support that kind of land use planning? And so one of the things that we're doing is we're taking our prospectivity models and we're working with Parks Canada and the Nature Conservancy of Canada to sort of add geology into their conservation planning. I think companies in the future will want this type of data and expertise too. So they're going to be looking for closer collaboration to sort of identify areas where they can conserve and balance their mineral exploration activities. And this pilot study also formed the basis for a new $76 million research program on critical minerals, where we're trying to really incorporate and embed ESG principles into pre-competitive geoscience. And that's the last part of this presentation. It's looking at sort of, the last few slides really sort of emphasize conservation, but we can expand that even further to sort of look at sustainability more broadly. And so one way to think about that is something called environmental social governance, so ESG. So how can we sort of look at not just where biodiversity is and the implications of biodiversity, but what are all of the potential impacts of mineral exploration and critical minerals for all sorts of different, in all sorts of different areas. So this is brand new research that sort of is about to be submitted. And so we asked the question, what can we, is there any way to predict sort of the types of conflicts, natural resources conflicts that can lead to delays or increase the cost of critical mineral exploration projects? And can we predict those conflict events prior to them occurring? So what we did was we took different environmental, social, and governance data sets. This is all public data mapping different aspects of ESG. And we combine them using deep learning to sort of try to predict whether we could identify areas that are higher risk for new mineral exploration and development. So these green dots are sort of the known natural resources conflicts around the world, extracted from media outlets, so newspapers, TV, and the internet. These are millions and millions of different conflict events. These could range from sort of just verbal disputes between local communities. They could be controversial policies. They could be all the way up to armed conflict. So there are a varying range of severity. And so we use this as training data, and we combine that information with our ESG data sets to create maps like this. So this is a deep learning model where we're trying to predict these areas that are most susceptible to conflict for the globe. And we're looking at the globe because these critical mineral supply chains are global. And we also want to sort of to place that our critical mineral knowledge that we're developing in Canada into a global context. So one of the feedbacks that we got from the work looking at conservation priorities was that you can't just look at Canada in isolation because Canada has high ESG overall. And so we need to understand the environmental, social governance risks of Canada within a global context. And so when we zoom in on a model like this, we can quite clearly see that areas in sort of Europe where there's a lot of human population, there's sort of higher risk for conflict. But the model is actually a bit more sophisticated than that. So if we go into Tanzania, where I did my PhD, we can see that the area around Lake Victoria, which has a high mineral potential for all sorts of different things, including gold, we can see that there are these zones of higher potential for natural resources conflict because of pasture land, key biodiversity areas, and so on. And so we can use these maps to sort of potentially predict areas for conflict, but also to guide mineral exploration potentially, to essentially predict areas that are sort of more environmentally or socially sensitive. And we can interrogate these maps a little bit more closely. So here is, deep learning is sort of famously a black box, but in reality, with when you have a sort of more of a shallow neural network, you can still interrogate the data a little bit. So this deep learning variable importance is based on the weights of the neural network model, the first few hidden layers of that neural network model. And we can see that the highest weights are for things like human settlements and their proxies. So ecosystem stress, pasture, cropland. This makes sense because you'd expect to see most of the conflict in areas where people live. So this makes sense to some extent. But that's a problem for critical minerals because a lot of the areas where we're most prospective for critical minerals are areas that don't have people, where people don't live. So these are sort of the exploration frontiers. And so to address that problem, we've also been doing knowledge-driven modeling, which are sort of least susceptible to this sort of bias by where people live. And we've created these sort of ESG ratings based on those knowledge-driven methods to sort of start ranking countries based on their geospatial risks for natural resources conflict. With ESG ratings here representing higher ESG ratings here representing areas that are sort of least susceptible to conflict. And this type of research is really important for informing government policies. So right now we have something called the Mineral Security Partnership, which is a group of countries that are sort of like-minded countries who are focused on ESG. And to secure supply chains, they're trying to sort of invest in these countries and invest in critical mineral projects in these countries so to get more reliable sources of critical minerals. But the problem is that these policies are developed sort of ad hoc, so maybe with more qualitative assessments of ESG, whereas we're trying to sort of bring some more data into that and sort of predict these spatially situated risks using public ESG data. We can also apply this knowledge to predict the spatially situated risks of actual individual mineral occurrences. So this plot here is showing over 200 mineral occurrences for lithium around the world, classified to mineral system, and showing the uncertainty of that ESG rating based on the uncertainty in the underlying data. And so the main point of this plot is that even when we think about the uncertainty of the underlying data, there are systematic differences in the spatially situated risks for different mineral occurrences around the world. They are distinct, and that some of the largest lithium mineral deposits are actually have intermediate ESG ratings relative to this sort of subset of higher ESG ratings for pegmatite-hosted lithium mineral occurrences. So one of the ways that we can kind of use this information not only to inform government policies, but it could be for companies to sort of manage these risks. So maybe they want to create new management strategies to increase their ESG rating and sort of reduce the chance of natural resources conflict. We can plot this data in a different way. Here showing each circle is a different mineral occurrence color-coded to its ESG rating and a percentile ranking, so in the globe. And then the size of that circles are proportional to the tonnage. And the point of this graph is that the most highest ESG ratings are these pegmatite-hosted deposits in yellow, but they are also the smallest size. And so what this information reveals is that there's trade-offs between the sources of lithium, the ESG rating, and size. And so this information can also help craft policies in terms of where are the best places to source our critical minerals. And again, this is not just something that's important for governments. In 2023, the Canadian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy released their ESG guidelines. And they're basically they're saying that ESG are sort of modifying factors for the calculation of a mineral resource. So yes, geology is important. We need to sort of map out where these mineral occurrences are, their grade and their tonnage, but we also need to understand all of the other factors that impact whether that deposit will be mined in the future. The United Nations is also including ESG in their definition of a mineral resource. And so if these policies are ultimately adopted, it could mean that measuring ESG is as important as measuring tonnage and grade. And so I think there's a role here for geological surveys to sort of not only supply public geoscience, but there's a role for geological surveys to sort of also combine that geoscience knowledge with ESG by working with our collaborators to sort of to give that more holistic view of what mineral potential is. And we need to do this pretty quickly. And so oftentimes the mineral value chain is thought of as like a linear chain from exploration, development, mining, processing, and remediation. But we need critical minerals and we need them very quickly. And so the traditional value chain is essentially too slow to sort of supply for the renewable energy transition. So we need a way of speeding this process up, but we can't just speed up at the risk of damaging the environment either. So we need to speed up this process, but we also need to sort of keep it sustainable and embed in ESG principles. And so one of the better ways, or a different way to think about this, is sort of a value network. And so what we're really trying to do is to create shortcuts across this value network. So this presentation is focused a lot on land use planning. So how do we take data and think about what would happen at remediation, processing, and closure at the start of the process, so before mineral exploration. And by predicting natural resources conflict, predicting areas of lower environmental risk at the start of the process, there's a hope that we can sort of speed up this value chain. But public geoscience can also be used to speed up or cut across this value network in other ways. And I'm thinking of maybe of geometallurgy. So the whole point of geometallurgy is taking our mineral systems knowledge at the exploration stage, imagining what it would take to sort of liberate those minerals before mining even occurs. So here we're going from exploration and we're thinking about mining even before development. So that's just another example of cutting across this value chain to speed things up. So I think that's kind of the name of the game for a lot of our geoscience research, is to think of ways that we can use geoscience to sort of speed up this process while sort of balancing that speed with sustainability. And digitalization will be very, very important for this. So a lot of us geoscientists, often we're focused on data. It's the base of this pyramid. And we then we compress our knowledge of that data into conceptual models. And so oftentimes when we're talking about data and conceptual models, we're talking to scientists. But what we really need to do is take that data and conceptual models and then compress that information even further to make predictions and then to deploy those models to the public. And so as we move from and compress our knowledge from data to conceptual models to prediction to deployment, it turns out that we're actually talking to more and more people. And so I think this kind of shows why digitalization and artificial intelligence are important. It's not about just changing, it's about changing how we do our science so that we reach more and more people. So if we only talk to scientists, we're talking about 20,000 people in Canada, whereas the general public is closer to 40 million. And so this process is really based on good data. So we can't take data out of the bottom of the pyramid, everything falls apart. But I think the future of geoscience really depends on sort of spending a bit more time on the prediction and deployment. And that's sort of recognized in this plot of the that Danielle Labelle produced in 2020, showing how the role of geological surveys has evolved through time. And so Danielle sort of imagined that today we're in this contemporary phase where we're talking about sustainability and artificial intelligence. And so this is sort of kind of touching on that, you know, us as economic geologists, we can't just talk to economic geologists. We need to be taking our science and expanding it to the broader audience, potentially using these sort of machine learning by compressing our knowledge into machine learning models and then deploying those models. And that's also at the heart of sort of this new program called the Critical Minerals Geoscience and Data Program. So the Targeted Geoscience Initiative has been going on for 25 years, and it was really focused on mineral system science. The difference between TGI and the Critical Minerals Geoscience and Data Program is that we're trying to extend that research to two new poles, environmental geoscience and data science. So we're trying to take our economic geology knowledge, and we're trying to combine that with other expertise, working collaboratively with other people, and sort of bringing in the data science, environmental geoscience. And so there's different projects here that sort of kind of show how that process could work. So we want to prioritize our mineral system knowledge on sort of lower energy processing mineral deposit types like clays, brines, for instance. So that's a way we can take our mineral system science and combine it with environmental geoscience. A lot of the research I was showing you in the map form, these green economic pathways, this is taking our prospectivity modeling, but then thinking about it in terms of from an environmental lens. And then we get to sort of the middle of this ternary diagram. So that's sort of one of the what differentiates our new program called Critical Minerals Geoscience and Data from the previous program. It's really sort of embedding those ESG principles and also thinking about it from a data science perspective. And we're hiring. So you may have seen the call out. We had our first hiring blitz, I guess, last year. I looked over 200 different applicants. We've hired some great new scientists working on pegmatites, carbonatites, and mine waste. And we're still hiring. We still are looking for people who are interested in data science, interested in sustainability, and interested in geoscience. So, you know, sometimes people ask me, like, what's the best thing about working for the government? And I think this is the closest distillation that I can get. It's you know, doing science that you love for the public good. I think that's my favorite part of my job. It's you get to do the things you wanted to do anyways, but you're actually applying it for a good purpose. And so that's the main conclusions of this the presentation is basically, I think we need to I think the future of geoscience is really taking artificial intelligence and environmental social governance principles and trying to shortcut that value network. So we want to identify new sources of critical minerals, but we don't want to compromise on sustainability. You know, I think using the green economics pathways concept, so predicting natural resources conflict, predicting environmental risk, that's way faster and cheaper than trying to solve those problems once you've started mining. So that's how green economic pathways, that's why it's shortcutting the value network, because we're trying to predict those before mining has even started. This is a problem or a challenge that I think will continue in the future. So as ESG is sort of integrated into the very definition of a mineral resource, environmental data will just be as important as geoscience data. And so one of the things that we're doing as part of the Critical Mineral Geoscience and Data Program is we're taking those proposals and we're saying, okay, you want to do this research, but how is this going to make mineral deposit? How are we going to find new sources of critical minerals faster? And how does this proposal improve the ESG performance? And so by asking those two questions, we're kind of shaping the types of research that we're doing as part of the Critical Mineral Geoscience and Data Program. All right, well, thank you very much.